We are going to look at 20 adjectives to describe the taste or describe the texture, how it feels in the mouth of food. I've given you the first letter of each adjective, as well as a definition or a hint or clue as to the meaning. Let's have a look at the first one. This adjective begins with B, and it means a sharp taste, often a little unpleasant. For example, strong coffee or dark chocolate can be described with this adjective. Bitter, bitter. That coffee is really bitter. Second one, this adjective again begins with B, and it means tasteless, and it has got a negative connotation. Bland, bland. For example, that sauce is really bland. It has no taste. It's absolutely tasteless. Next one. This adjective begins with C, and it means crispy. It describes texture and not taste. Crisps, or in American English, potato chips, can be described with this adjective. Crackers can also be described with this adjective. It makes a noise in the mouth when you eat it. Crunchy, crunchy. Begins with D, and it means there's little or no moisture in it, or little or no juice. And again, it describes texture. Dry, dry. That bread is quite dry. Next one begins with F, and it means it tastes clean, cool, or new. It's got a positive connotation, and it describes the taste of something. It's often used to describe bread or cakes that are new. Fresh, fresh. The first letter of this adjective is G, and a synonym is oily, and it's got a negative connotation. It can describe both the taste and the texture. Greasy, greasy. Those chips are very greasy. This adjective begins with J, and it means it's got a lot of moisture. It's the opposite of dry. It describes the texture, and it's got a positive meaning, a positive connotation. Juicy, juicy. For example, you can describe a steak as being juicy. It's got a lot of moisture. Or an apple can be described as juicy. A juicy apple, a juicy steak. Next adjective begins with M, and this means it isn't strong, it isn't bitter, and it isn't spicy. It describes the taste, and it can have either a positive or a negative connotation. Mild, mild. For example, you could describe a curry as mild. Now, the next one is a compound adjective. This means that it's hyphenated. The first part begins with M, the second part begins with W, and it means delicious. It describes taste, of course, and it's the opposite of disgusting or horrible. Mouth-watering. Mouth-watering. A mouth-watering meal. A mouth-watering dinner. Next adjective begins with R, and it means that it's ready to eat, and it's used especially to describe fruit or vegetables. It can also be used to describe a very strong cheese, a strong tasting or strong smelling cheese. Ripe, ripe. For example, a ripe pear is extremely juicy. It's ready to eat. Let's have a look at the adjectives in the second column. Quite a few of them begin with S, as you may notice. So the first one contains a lot of salt, and it's used to describe the taste. Salty, salty. Those crisps are far too salty. Next one also begins with S, and it means a sharp taste, very similar to bitter, and it's often unpleasant, and it's often used to describe, for example, lemons, and also milk that isn't fresh. This word is also the opposite of fresh when we are talking about milk. Sour, sour. That lemon juice is much too sour for my liking. Next one begins with S, and it means it's got lots of spices, often hot. It's the opposite of mild. So the opposite of a mild curry would be a hot curry, or can you think of an adjective beginning with S? Spicy. Okay, a spicy curry. Next adjective beginning with S, it's the opposite of fresh, especially when describing bread or cakes, and also milk, the opposite of fresh milk. So this adjective describes taste, and it's the opposite of fresh, especially for bakery products and also milk. Stale, stale. After 6 days, those cakes have become stale. Next one, beginning with S, lots of flavor, an intense taste. It's the opposite of mild. For example, a ripe cheese. Strong. That cheese has got a strong taste. That sauce has a strong taste. Now, if you're talking about curries, you want to describe something as being spicy, we wouldn't say it's strong. We would use spicy to describe a hot curry. But cheese or sauce, for example, with an intense taste, with lots of flavor, we would describe it as being strong. And the final adjective beginning with S simply means a sweet taste. Sugary, sugary. That dessert was much too sugary for my liking. Right, next adjective begins with a T, and it means it's got a good taste. It has a positive connotation. Tasty, tasty. A tasty lunch. Very tasty is synonymous with delicious or mouth-watering. Okay, tasty is a little less emphatic than delicious or mouth-watering. Next adjective beginning with T means it's easy to cut or chew, and it's used especially for describing meat. It describes the texture and not the taste, and it's got a positive connotation. Tender, tender. For example, that steak is really tender. Now, the opposite of tender, if you look at the final adjective, also begins with T. It's difficult to cut or chew, used especially for describing the texture of meat. And it's the opposite of tender. So this obviously has got a negative connotation. Tough, tough. That steak is overcooked. It's been cooked far too long. It tastes like shoe leather. It's really tough. Please take it away and bring me a tender one that I can actually cut with my knife.